I am a risk taker. I like to fly the plane as I'm building it.
You're driving to the airport to pick up field green.
I wouldn't feed my family commodity food. Why would I feed my guests commodity food?
When was the moment the light bulb kind of hit, like, wow, we've got something here? From South Bend to Evansville and everywhere in between, this is Get In, the show focused on the Hoosier State and the incredible stories happening here today. I'm Nate Spengel, founder of Get Indiana, and I will be your host for today's conversation. JC Hart Company is your answer to navigating the apartment rental journey. With almost 50 years of creating enjoyable living experiences in Indiana, you'll be sure to find your new home sweet home. You're going to find 30 communities in the best areas Indiana has to offer. Hamilton County, downtown Indy, Bloomington, just to name a few, along with 5 brand new luxury communities. Visit homeisjchart.com/Nate to find their list of locations and reach out to one of their many dedicated leasing agents for a personalized tour. Tell them Nate sent you and they're going to take good care of you. Looking for a career in property management? You'll also find a list of open positions on their website, along with all the reasons why JC Hart is named one of Indiana's best places to work. Want a sneak peek into life as a JC Hart resident or associate? Be sure to check them out on Instagram at homeisjchart or visit homeisjchart.com/Nate. One more time, home is JC Hart. Today I'm joined by Martha Hoover, the founder of Won't Stop Hospitality, a restaurant group based here in Indianapolis, which includes beloved local restaurants like Cafe Patachou and Napolese. With over 30 years of experience in the restaurant industry, she has been a pioneering force in showcasing Indiana's local ingredients and fostering partnerships with local farmers here in central Indiana. Through her work, Martha has helped transform Indianapolis into a culinary destination, while also giving back to the community through the Petite Chou Foundation, which I'm super excited to talk about the way that it's helping address youth food insecurity. Today we're going to be talking about Martha's food founder journey, what the real recipe for success is in the restaurant biz, and opportunities she's seeing in Indiana, and the life-changing impact of the Petite Chou Foundation. Martha, welcome to Get In.
Well, thank you, Nate. I love it. First off, I love that you mentioned Evansville. It's my husband's hometown, the Pocket City, and often is forgotten. So thank you for highlighting it so often.
I've actually really enjoyed Evansville. I've been down there a few times, and they have a nice little downtown area, and there are some really cool businesses that are growing in southern Indiana.
I agree.
I was actually down also just north of Evansville in Jasper.
Yes.
Have you been? Jasper is a place.
Indiana.
I love Jasper. We were there and we went to, there's this restaurant, German restaurant called the Schnitzelbank, and it is incredible.
Okay, so all those German restaurants in southern Indiana, that's not a new restaurant, is it? That
No.
restaurant's been there for
Ever.
several restaurant generations. I remember when I was dating my husband and going to Evansville, we would go to places like Horse Ketters. I mean, these restaurants that are throwbacks. But anyhow, thank you for that. And I'm going to make one slight correction. I've been in this business for 36 years. Holy crap.
Hey,
right?
yo,
Yeah.
36 years.
Yeah, almost 36, yeah.
Okay. And where was the start at? Like, where was the beginning, your first foray into the restaurant biz?
1989, Indianapolis, Indiana, 49th in Pennsylvania, with my first restaurant, Cafe Patachou.
So your first dip into this was starting a restaurant.
Yeah, I've said this often, and I hope the story never gets stale. I opened my first restaurant having never worked in a restaurant, having never worked in a for-profit business. I was a sex crimes prosecutor working in public service, and also I opened that first restaurant having no culinary background other than I love to entertain, I love to cook, I love to eat, I love to travel to eat. And I also didn't know I was pregnant with my third child. You know, those were all things that when you take them together, especially in 1989, when you go back, zoom back and understand what the food community was like then, what food culture was, really what it wasn't because it didn't exist. All those things are truly a recipe for disaster.
So take me back, 1989 then. What were like the top 3 restaurants or like the staple places in Indianapolis where people were like, oh, I love XYZ restaurant?
Well, I think to go back to 1989, you have to also understand no social media, no computer, no Instagram. Restaurants were of 2 types. They were either of single mom and pop or they were mass produced. And Indianapolis and Columbus, Indiana in 1989 were considered the test zones for all these mass-produced big restaurants.
I had heard this.
Yeah, no, it's
The like
verifiable.
national franchises would like test out stuff here, right?
Yeah, because they consider this market to be so mid-America and we didn't have a huge amount of competition in the restaurant industry then with restaurants that were ethnic or immigrant-based restaurants because we didn't have those communities at large, So they came in and they opened up things like Olive Gardens and I don't know the Mexican version of Olive Garden and the Italian version of this and that's just where the restaurant scene was. There really were no solid neighborhood restaurants, and what set Cafe Patachou apart at the very beginning, from day one in 1989, was the fact that I opened in the neighborhood in which I lived. And at the time I opened Cafe Patachou at 49th and Penn, Cafe Patachou was the first new tenant since 1940 in that center.
For anyone that doesn't know, the location at 49th and Penn is iconic to me, right? It's like you want to see the who's who of Indianapolis, and whether it's the business or culture community, like they're getting breakfast on Friday mornings at that location.
Woohoo, thank you.
Absolutely. So what was in it before you guys took over?
The strip center that was located, it was called Hammerko's Corner, still is, had a dry cleaner. The dry cleaner still exists, but it's been through 3 owners since.
Now it's a Tide cleaner, right?
Yeah,
Right there.
Yeah, it's a national, because, we should probably talk about this. This is what happens to all industries these days. It goes from mom and pop to scale, some type of scale, to some type of equity or investment, to some type of consolidated ownership, that kind of thing. I mean, it's just happened in every industry, including the restaurant industry. So what was there initially was a dress shop, barber shop, a little antique store called Hope's, and the drugstore. There was a drugstore where Cafe Patachou is currently located on the corner, was the drugstore called Hammerker's Pharmacy. And the original Cafe Patachou was 3 doors north of the corner.
Oh.
Yeah, see, you're too young to remember this. You probably were like still, crawling on the floor.
1989, right? I was non-existent.
Okay.
I'm a 97 baby, so this is like well before my time. So 3 doors north down towards where the dry cleaner or like the cleaners is today?
Yeah.
Wow. And how big was the space?
1,400 square feet. It was tiny.
How many tables would you fit in 14?
I'm sorry, I'm one of these restaurateurs. Don't ask me tables and seats because I can't remember. It's not that it was so long ago. All I know is this. I opened it with just nothing but sheer audacity and thinking that I could do it, in spite of the fact that in 1989, there was no food culture. And in 1989, people not only did they not care about food or high quality food, there was no such thing as neighborhood development. And that was a good thing. It was a good thing in retrospect for me, because the pressure on new restaurants today, when you open, you better be able to deliver what you say you're going to deliver, because the pressure is not only financially real, but also you've got critics everywhere on social media. You have people who, whether or not they travel, they look at Instagram and they think they know because of Instagram what food's supposed to look like, much more important to most people than what food is actually supposed to taste like or what it's supposed to be, how it's supposed to be made, how it culturally aligns, whatever. So it was a more innocent time, which allowed me to learn my craft. I really do consider it a craft and an art, allowed me to learn my art at the same time that it allowed my customers to learn the art as well. Really lovely time, those first 10 years of growing together.
So you opened this in 1989. You'd never worked in a restaurant.
Nope.
You'd had a background in law.
Yeah.
You know what? We're going to open a restaurant. And what did you think your specialty was? Or what was your specialty at the time?
Also, it wasn't we're going to open up a restaurant. It was I am going to open up a restaurant. And I want to point that out because restaurant and restaurant work was not highly regarded. It is today. People, I used to always say it used to be when I was growing up, and I was I'm going to say a young adult by then, when I first opened, that was 36 years ago, people didn't revere the restaurant world. They thought that restaurants were the businesses that you went into as a plan B, something because you had nothing, weren't able to do anything else. And people really, really were disdainful about the industry. So that was one handicap. And then the other handicap is that I was a woman doing it. And that also, in 1989, was considered sacrilege. There weren't a lot of women in food at the ownership level.
Were you married at that time?
Married with 2 kids. I remember I was pregnant, not knowing I was pregnant with my third. So yeah, I was married, 2 little girls, didn't know as I opened that I was pregnant with my son, David.
And that's a big jump, right? Because I don't know what I'm just assuming the salary in law is a little bit higher than the salary of starting a restaurant, right? And you have 3 kids or the third kid on the way. That's not like an easy lifestyle change, right?
No, it wasn't, but I had a calling. I've had a calling regarding food since I was a young girl. I loved what I did in law. I thought it was really important. It was really difficult, but it wasn't what I wanted to do. And I'm just you have to kind of know yourself, and I've always known myself, and I'm a very purpose-driven person. And I thought that the purpose of my job in the legal world was an incredible purpose, but it did not feed my soul. And I just wanted to do something that fed my soul. It's not like I decided to do food out of like this vacuum of nothing. There was a food scene happening, but it wasn't happening in the Midwest. But it was happening on the coast, as you could imagine. Cities like New York and San Francisco were obviously culinary centers. The culinary centers had not dripped out, right? And also I had the remarkable foresight, or this goes to my kind of purpose-driven life. My goal getting out of high school was to go to Paris. That's all I wanted to do. And I didn't want to go to Paris. This was a long time ago, Nate. I did not want to go to Paris to see all the art and architecture. I did. I mean, I ended up doing that, but I wanted to go truly for what I consider to be the holy grail of cuisine.
Really?
And I was supposed to be there worked all through high school, saved money, took myself to Paris, flew over. I wish I still had that paper ticket with all the copies and the red thing in between, the mimeograph thing. First thing I did was go to a restaurant. I was supposed to stay for 2 weeks. I ended up staying for 3.5 months.
You just call back home to your family and say, "Yep, not coming home. Sorry."
No, I called back to my family and said, "I need money. I'm out of money." And because I had stayed much longer, but everything was less complicated. Everything was cheaper. This is in the days where you were using maps, like real maps. And it was also in a day when you didn't have these top 10 lists. You weren't living by the list. You were living by actually getting out and doing things. So talking to people, getting recommendations in real time, everything about it was less complicated, but also in a sense a little more complicated because you had to do the work on the ground.
Yes, it wasn't just so you couldn't just go look at Google reviews and then rank by highest stars or most reviews or whatever. You had to go ask people.
Or you had to actually walk in a place and try it yourself and take notes and then recommend it to somebody or have it be recommended, that kind of thing.
So were you this seems like you're kind of a risk taker, right? You graduate high school and you fly across the Atlantic to hang out for 3.5 months in Paris, or you leave a career in the legal field to open up a restaurant. That seems like you're kind of a risk taker.
I am a risk taker. It has been said about me before by people who worked for me that I like to fly the plane as I'm building it. And I take that as a compliment. I also have always said about myself that I'm someone who just dives into the deep end of the pool. And I'm also not, as I think most risk takers are, I am not afraid of failure. I don't think failure is the worst thing. So we live in an era of where if someone opens a restaurant and it closes, the IBJ runs 10 days of articles on it. It's the headline, as if it is the mortal sin. And I'm like, no, these are people who have tried something. And for whatever reason, whether it's financial, emotional, personal, I don't know what the reason is. For whatever reason, they decide to try something else or to get out of it. No fault. I am like, go. You make that decision.
Are you familiar? Do you know Scott Wise?
I know Scott, of course.
Scott sat in that chair and we put that episode out, and obviously incredible rise of Scotty's Brewhouse and the decline of Scotty's Brewhouse and just like all that. By the end of it, like he was on the front page of the IBJ, like, beloved restaurant closes, all this stuff. As he got up, I was like, man, I'm so inspired by him. Like to go through all that and then to go back out and open another restaurant concept. Cause he's like, I love this. Like I can do this. It can work. And man, that you're talking about failing and the IBJ, all that stuff. Like that man's been through the ringer and still has the passion to still be in the industry. Like kudos to him. It was wild.
I think a lot of Scott. I think he also has grown and evolved and understands himself. He understands the industry. He understands the investment component of the industry. And I'm glad that you mentioned him. I've never talked to him about this. So next time I see him, I'm going to bring you up. And thank you for bringing that to my attention. There is no shame in these failures. Businesses are not static. They move, they grow, they change, they evolve. And not everything lasts the way it started. I mean, if I was still running the business that I opened with in 1989, I should be out of business. You know what I mean? If we had not evolved, if we had not grown, if we had not changed the way we were doing things, not because we were doing anything wrong, but because you learn more and you bring that wisdom into what you're doing and how you're doing it.
Well, take us through that evolution, right? So you opened with 1,400 square feet at the corner of 49th and Penn.
Yeah.
What was the focus of the restaurant?
Well, again, going back to 1989, the focus of the restaurant was to do something that in food that worked for me as a young mother, which meant breakfast and lunch. And that was another handicap because in 1989, it was all about dinner restaurants, right? In 1989, people were not going to restaurants the way you are going to restaurants. Restaurants were not considered to be third places. They were not considered to be community-centered. They were just considered mostly places for a meal, mostly places for a celebratory meal. People weren't going to restaurants 5 nights a week. And when people went out, they were thinking mostly of dinner. And of course, then there were the business lunch restaurants. But breakfast and lunch was kind of left to that Waffle House genre. I don't even know. I've been to Cracker Barrel once in my life, and there are a couple of restaurants.
I like the little square peg game. The little square peg game at Cracker Barrel. You know what I'm talking about? Like the little golf tee game?
No, because I think I literally walked in and walked out. The smell of fake maple bothered me so much.
That's fair. That's fair.
Is that fair?
That's fair.
I used to always say that my tombstone, which has changed a lot, what I want written on my tombstone, but at one point it was going to be, she never tried a White Castle. I mean, I've always been a bit of a food snob. So,
that's fair.
But I guess my whole point is breakfast and lunch was not, it was very mom and pop, or it was very, very, very mainstream, poor quality.
Yep. So you're opening a breakfast and lunch restaurant.
Yeah, because it worked for my family life.
Were there other restaurants in the area at that time?
100% no, Nate.
Oh.
There was nothing.
Okay, so that's good. And was at the time, I think of that Meridian Kessler area right in there as a lot of business centered individuals lived in that neighborhood. Was that still the case in 1989?
It was not. I mean, It was always a lovely, wonderful neighborhood. It was what I would consider a drive-through neighborhood. Mm. People lived there, but there wasn't the emphasis on walkability. In 1989, people did not expect amenities in their own neighborhood. They were fine to get in the car and drive to the mall, get in the car and drive to the grocery store, get in the car and drive somewhere, even to destination restaurants, right? That's what it was. Things have changed so greatly. And now live in a situation, and I love this, where neighborhoods are truly, they want to be self-sufficient. So you want to have your coffee shop, your breakfast restaurant, your dinner place, your pizza place. You want to have your little pub, your bar.
The less car time, the better.
The less car time, the better. And so you're getting all these, and that's always been the situation in New York. Everyone thinks of New York as this huge city. It is. Huge city. You can't deny that. But within that huge city are hundreds of pockets of neighbors and neighborhoods. My oldest daughter has lived in Manhattan for the last 20-some years. I have friends who live in Manhattan. They almost never leave their 5-block radius. They just don't. They don't need to. They've got their grocery store, their restaurant, their coffee shop, their cinemas, their whatever. So I think that's going to be a trend that we see here as well.
Which I love. I think it's super, and you're seeing it, right? Like there's that little, and I would even say that the spot at 49th and Penn kind of like has trickled like from college, all the way down there to Pennsylvania, and that whole little area is just super fun, and it's cool to live over there. And there's a few other ones, like the 54th and College area with the grocery store there, and Fat Dan's and 20 Tap and the Bulldog and Half Liters right around the corner and Good Morning Mount. Like there are those little pockets all the way down College, I feel like, which is cool.
And I don't know what their data shows. I'm sure that they do, but I bet you 20% of people use those places like Fat Dan, like let's drive from Carmel to Fat Dan's. I don't know if people do that, but most of their clientele, I bet, can walk from Butler or Sobro or whatever and go there.
Which I love. I think it's super cool. Okay, so take me back. We're in 1989. You open it. What's the first day like? How did things start in those early years?
The saddest thing for me, my big regret on the first day is that's the one time I wish I could go back with my cell phone and take pictures. We took no pictures because it was just kind of a mad rush. The first day was remarkably exhilarating in its chaos. I didn't know what I was doing. I unlocked the door and turned on a light. I actually had customers. I had customers that first day who remained steady customers for 20 years.
Holy.
It was remarkable. I could name them. They were some of the most lovely and supportive people. And they were all early adapters to going, oh my gosh, we have a restaurant, to your point, that we can walk to or drive to on the way to work. That was a big part of our customer base, was people going on the way to work. I had a little baby. I was cooking. The baby was with me at the restaurant. People think of Patachou as being really busy all the time. It was a slow build. It really was. But by the third Sunday, I was like, oh my God. By Sunday number 3, I understood the breakfast lunch restaurant model much better than I did on day number 1, because then we started attracting the quote-unquote church crowd. And those people came in, probably wasn't massive numbers, but to our inexperienced eyes, they were massive numbers. I had a chef back then, a guy who started with me named Bruce. I mean, we were committed to making this restaurant successful. He was not a trained chef. He had come up, but he had worked in catering mostly. He was, by the way, during an interview when I hired him, he said, I really am hesitant to work for a woman. I always, when I do see him, I tease him about that. We ended up being great friends and great colleagues, and he worked for me for almost 18 years. So, yeah. In fact, the granola that we sell now was a version of what we used to call Bruce's granola. We've changed the recipe, but for the first 12 years or so, we called it Bruce's granola because it was his recipe. But I forgot your question, Nate. What was it?
Well, we're just talking through those early years. So steady business, things are growing. When was the moment when the light bulb kind of hit, like, wow, we've got something here?
Almost from day one, because when you say we got something, I guess what I thought was something, might differ from what somebody else thinks is something. I realized that we were filling a hole that was there. And I realized early on, I'm talking 35 years ago, that Patachou, as it existed in that tiny little space at 49th and Penn, was truly becoming a community center. That has always been what I thought our secret sauce was, understanding the place we fill in a community. More so today, people have remarkable choices as to where they can go to eat. And people go to places for a variety of reasons. Most of the time, believe it or not, the food is not the reason they go. They go because of the level of hospitality, how they feel embedded, how they feel welcome. That's what makes people want to return to a restaurant day after day after day.
I was going to say, do you think it is the food that might get them through the door the first time?
Absolutely.
And it's the hospitality that makes them lifelong customers?
Absolutely. It's the ambiance. It's how they're made to feel welcome, how they're made to feel appreciated, different than welcome, appreciated, and how they are served.
When did it go from one restaurant to your ambition kind of changes to build a restaurant group?
We were doing well. We were profitable year one, which of course back in 1989, that was in and of itself an anomaly. Most restaurants did not last a year. Very few restaurants got to year 3, let alone year 5. But in year 2 or 3, I felt like I had it down enough. I thought that there was opportunity for some expansion of Patachou. And I went to another small location at River Crossing, which is still in existence, but I expanded. I moved locations within 49th and Penn in year 15 of existence.
Is that where you got the corner spot?
Yes, and that was because the drugstore went out of business. And then the same thing happened at River Crossing. My initial location at River Crossing was about 1,200 square feet. I like small spaces. That's one thing I think if we get to talk about trends, like where restaurants are going, one of the things that's happening in restaurant world right now everywhere is the return to small spaces. There are lots of reasons for that. We can talk about that. But my restaurant at 49th and Penn was, 1,400 square feet. The restaurant at River Crossing was 1,200, I think.
Where was it at River Crossing?
The existing Patachou is on the hard corner, and we were the next available position. So we were interior.
I got you.
Yeah. As we started getting more successful, I started looking for other opportunities. I always thought, this is good. People are responding, and I felt like there was talent in town. There were real estate opportunity and markets that were not served, not just underserved, but not served. So I started on a very slow local expansion.
Was the focus always around the premium ingredients?
Yes.
So from day one, like where were you sourcing your ingredients in the first 2 locations?
From a farmer named Bill who would pull up in the afternoon in the summer with his pickup truck and say to me, "Martha, I got corn."
No way.
And I'm not exaggerating.
Bill. Where was Bill's farm at?
Couldn't tell you. Haven't seen Bill in 30 years because his life changed dramatically. I used to drive down, talking about Evansville, I used to drive down to southern Indiana several times in the summer. I'd stick my kids in my old Volvo station wagon, and we would drive down to get Posey County melons and southern Indiana peaches. The produce houses hadn't yet started serving local. Pete Piazza always says that I brought field greens to Indiana and arugula to Indiana. We couldn't even get field greens locally. I had to fly them in, and we'd have to go to the airport in the early days to pick up.
Stop.
Something that now is so ubiquitous that I think Wendy's has a field green salad or did at some point. No, I mean, 1980. I am not kidding you.
You're driving to the airport to pick up field greens.
And by the way, those field greens were expensive, because you had to freight them in. It was absolutely an insane time.
But you refused to sacrifice quality of your artwork, right? Your concept that you were bringing to life.
I thought that My restaurant was an extension of my dining room at home. And I always thought that I was entertaining people. In other words, I was a host to anyone who would walk in my restaurant. And I wouldn't feed my family commodity food. Why would I feed my guests commodity food? I also always saw myself as not being unique. I think that's a critical component of the success of the company I built. I didn't think I was unique, and what I mean by then is I thought if I wanted this, if I attach value to quality, I am sure there are a lot of people like me who attach value to quality.
Take me back to 1989 and just like the growth up there through the last 30 years. When people think breakfast, a lot of times they're thinking cheap, inexpensive, fast, like throw some hash browns and some gravy and some biscuits on a plate and let's ride. I would say, this is like my outside opinion, it's like you pay for what you get at your restaurant, right? Especially at Patachou.
Here's the trick that people don't understand when they say you pay for what you get. You pay for what you get everywhere. Restaurants, when you get a $3.99 meal, don't deceive yourself. You are paying for what you're getting. And what you're getting is a remarkably poor quality food. If price is what's the most important thing to you, I get it. Here's another way to look at it. I studied economics, so I always bring things back to the subject that I'm so into. You have to define value. And when it comes to food, most people, most consumers define value as the most for the least. The most amount of food for the least amount of money. That has been the American food model since the agricultural push. The whole trick that, the wool over people's eyes is that they are getting a bargain. There are no bargains in life, especially when it comes to food. And what happens when you buy into and insist on supporting the definition of value being the most amount of food for the least amount of money, what happens is everyone who has been part of that process of producing that food is on the lower rung of the ladder. When you don't prioritize the quality, you also do not prioritize the lives and work of the people who have created those items.
There's a reason that we're getting $4.99 t-shirts from, like, what has to go into that, from sourcing to creating, and like to get it over here for a $4.99 shirt.
That's right. And what the fallout, the collateral is, who's being hired, how they're being treated, how they're being paid. You get where I'm going with this. So I think there needs to be a real switch and a real subject conversations. At the very heart of it, I believe so strongly that there is dignity in all work. And that means that I think it's just shit in the food world that the person who distributes the food, big distributors, make more money than the people who make the product, or pay more money for the packaging than they do for what's inside the packaging. I don't know. These are things I think as a society we should be discussing at dinner tables.
Are you familiar with the story of Patagonia?
I am.
And like, I'm getting like very Patagonia, just like vibes from the way you're building, the way you've built your restaurants, your company, to the way that they built that, where with a priority on quality, where it's like you buy a Patagonia jacket or whatever, it's supposed to be like, hey, for a long time, I think they just changed it. For a long time, it was free repairs. Now it might be like $5 patches or whatever.
I was just in the repair shop in Manhattan with some Patagonias that I've had for 20-some years that like the zippers failed or something. I think I paid almost nothing to have them fixed.
Like you can ship them in. I just did this with a jacket last year, right?
I happened to be in New York, which is why I like, I'll take my Patagonia stuff to the repair store.
Where it's like, this is the last jacket you're supposed to buy. This is the last, whatever shirt, everything. And I'm getting that vibe where it's like you're paying for quality, but you're also like, people want to go work at Patagonia because they have such a good work-life balance and they're treated well and they're paid well. They're like good, they just treat their people right. So I love the whole ethos behind the brand that you've built.
It's ethos, and that's what values mean. It means your ethos. And one thing that I respect about Patagonia, which I tried to emulate, to be honest, was this gap, having a narrow gap between what I said we were and what we were. Most companies have a large gap. Some companies have a gigantic gap. And, if your definition of value is the most for the least, you're talking about a company with a large gap.
Look at a major fast food commercial on your television, and the burger or the chicken sandwich or whatever you see there looks really, really good, and go order it at your local fast food joint. And talk about a gap between what you say and show you are versus what you actually are, and it is pathetic, honestly. I wanted to give a huge shout out to our newest partner, Hope Plumbing. Now, Hope Plumbing serves Indianapolis and the surrounding areas when it comes to all things plumbing, obviously. That includes sewer and drain, water heaters, water softeners, leak repairs, sump pump, gas lines, plumbing inspections, reverse osmosis system installation, router services, downspout installation, and septic tanks. What don't these guys do? Whenever I have trouble, I make sure to call Hope Plumbing. They always do a great job on my house. They're going to do a great job on your house. Go to hopeplumbing.com to check them out.
It reminds me, Olive Garden for years ran commercials that claimed that they were artisanal products. They co-opted the word artisanal. To me, that was offensive. There is nothing artisanal. They have since scrapped those ads, I think because the word highlighted their gap. And no one went, oh my God, they are actually making this pasta from scratch using, time-worn recipes and ingredients of high quality.
And maybe at one time, like the first Olive Garden, I don't even know that founding story of that, but maybe, after you open your 400th store or whatever.
I don't know their founding story. I'm going to make up because I believe I want this to be true. And look, we live in a time when you can make shit up and everyone believes it. So I'm making this up about Olive Garden. I think it was created out of a boardroom. I don't think there was a little store named Olive Garden that got purchased by Darden and then blown to smithereens.
I think you're right.
I just
look. The first Olive Garden opened in Orlando, Florida, 1982. The restaurant was part of General Mills.
Boom,
wow.
shakalaka.
Wow, that's impressive. If it was open at a General Mills, that's like for sure.
For sure,
yeah.
Right?
Okay, well, let's advance down the road a little bit. When did you open your next concept? And what was your second concept?
It was Petite Chou. And I think I opened that year 10 or year 12.
So this would have been 90s sometime?
Yeah.
And same location there in Broad Ripple?
Yes.
And what was the idea behind that concept? Because it's similar but different.
No, it's very different, I think. Similar in its attachment to quality.
Was it also a breakfast and lunch place?
Yeah.
So similar of like the time of day.
Breakfast, lunch, dinner. What it was, I have been a Francophile since I told you I graduated from high school, but let me think, I was 17 and took myself to France and then started taking myself to France as often as I could afford. Luckily, back then, it didn't take a lot to do that, and I could stay in hostels, and food was not...
There's that risk taker staying in hostels over in France.
So true, so true. And I have had a pretty lifelong habit going to Paris several times a year, got a lovely group of friends there, and I eat with... I am a person of habit. Even though I'm a risk taker, I have been going to the same restaurants in Paris, some of them. I try new ones all the time, but I always go to the same 2 or 3 that I've been going to, especially with my husband. We got married 44 years ago.
Congrats.
I know.
44.
44. We're coming up to 44, and our honeymoon was spent in Paris, and we went to these restaurants 44 years ago that we still are going to. And my idea, to loop it back to thread this needle, Petite Chou was my interpretation of a small French bistro. And it took a good 5, 6, 7 years for people to embrace it because people were, you just said it, they were confused. They thought it was some version of Patachou, even though it was a very distinct, to me, very distinctively different with a much more traditional French food focus, and the service was different as well. The unifiers were the attention to detail, the attention to quality, and the way we treated staff and community. Those were always the distinguishers.
Okay, I love that. So your interpretation of a French bistro.
Yeah.
And that's one, there's only one location.
Yeah.
Right? And it wasn't, because there are multiple Napolese.
Two.
Two Napolese. There are multiple, also, how do you pronounce Patachou?
Patachou.
Patachou.
Yeah. But
So me and everyone else are pronouncing it wrong.
we don't care as long as you come in.
That's the good answer. Okay, well, I have to ask now then, where did the name Patachou, where did that come from?
Well, so back in the day, I worked in sex crimes prosecution at the prosecutor's office. I was a DA in the Marion County prosecutor's office in the first iteration of the sex crimes unit. It was a long time ago, and I wasn't like the major boss there. I was a deputy prosecuting attorney. I mostly was doing screenings. I had some trials. I really loved what I was doing. I'm one of these people also that I really love everything I do.
Same.
I really mean that. Like, I can embrace it all. I was a pain in the neck to Steve Goldsmith, who was the boss, the big guy, the guy who ran for office and was the prosecutor and set the tone, the agenda for the prosecutor's office. And for some reason, I didn't know that I wasn't in the inner circle. And I used to bother him relentlessly. Like at least 3 times a week, I would just knock on his door. He didn't have an open door policy. I would knock on the door, and he would look at me, and he would go, "What now?" He used to call me a cream puff all the time because my ideas about prosecution were a little different than the prevailing wisdom at the time. The prevailing wisdom was lock them up, throw them away. And I wasn't a very good lock them up, throw them away type person. Now, I was when I was doing sex crimes, but when I left sex crimes and was doing other areas of prosecutorial law, I was like, man, this is sad. Why don't we, if people had jobs and if people were educated, maybe we would see less of this stuff. That was a long time ago. Now, while people embrace that now, they didn't embrace it then. And he called me. I would go in with these far-fetched ideas, and he would tell me I was a cream puff. Okay. Patachou is French for cream puff.
I love that. So, what was used as a derogatory mark towards you?
Meant as a demeaning, derogatory mark became my reason for life.
Became your cornerstone of the company.
Totally.
That's incredible. Wow. Talk about looking at the haters, right? And being like, you know what? I'm going to take that nickname and I'm going to turn it into something spectacular.
I have, since I was a young person, had this weird talent of understanding a weakness and making it a strength. I think that does not come naturally to a lot of people. It weirdly came naturally to me. I don't know why. I'm not like a genius, but for some reason, my personality, my need for tenaciousness and to understand things, I was like, why is this thing that is determined to be a weakness, how can I turn this weakness around and really embrace it and somehow make it my strength?
I love that. Well, give us a scope for now. You've been doing this. So opened the first restaurant in 89. Over 35 years you've been doing this. It's a full-blown restaurant group now. Give us a size and scope of what the business looks like today.
Well, in June, I sold a significant part of the business to mea culpa. I did it. I went to
Is that private equity?
Private equity so that we could expand Cafe Patachou. It's very scalable, very expandable. It's also a very unique, it's an outlier in the breakfast lunch category. And I think that there's lots of opportunity for expansion outside of Indianapolis with Patachou.
Was that a hard decision to make?
No.
No. All right. Heck yeah. Why not?
I have always truly believed in relying on experts. And you can't be an expert in everything. And most entrepreneurs, if they fail, I believe they fail because they think that they are experts on everything. And I think everyone, every worker, every employee, every owner of a business, every boss, every whatever your title is, I think at some point you have to appreciate and understand and internalize where your own rim of competency is. And I did not have the ability financially to open up 10 new restaurants in a short period of time outside of the state of Indiana, outside the city of Indianapolis. And I needed expertise. And that's what I did. I went and I found who I thought would give me expertise.
So this past June,
Yeah.
sold a portion of the business.
Yeah, large portion.
And what's the plan there?
Well, I can't really speak to that. I
Oh.
am, not because it's a big secret, but I'm out of operations. And although I'm a board member to there is a new company, they are crafting the expansion plan as we speak. And I think in 2025, I imagine there will be 3 to 5 new Patachous outside of the Indianapolis market.
And so did you break those off? Like, does this include Napolese and Petite Chou? Is that how you pronounce that one?
You did. You pronounced that.
Petite Chou, right there.
Now, how can you say that well and you can't say Patachou?
I don't know. It's just my Hoosier dialect, I suppose. With the sale, was it just Patachou?
The sale was of the company, and the company included all those assets. The real focus of expansion is Cafe Patachou, and I think it should be.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you why. The Patachou model is very successful, A. And 2, we provide a breakfast and lunch experience that is a elevated breakfast and lunch experience.
And okay, so I'm gonna pull a question here, and I'm curious. From my experience, when I talked to Scott, he said when he sold that the commitment to quality when you bring private equity in can be tough, right? Some private equity firms are focused on, expanding their bottom dollar, right? Their bottom line, making more money. Is there still the continued focus? Is there the agreement? Like, it's still going to be a high quality product that people are getting when they go to these restaurants?
I promised that they would respect our value attachment to quality. Time will tell. I'm not part of operations, and I'm very hopeful. I'm very hopeful that, let's say, the larger investment is a success. And I think one of the things that will predicate success is the attachment to value and to quality, how we define value.
Yeah, I love that. And I think there's just a big focus on the foundation too. And like the restaurant group supports the foundation.
The company I created, Won't Stop Hospitality, supported the foundation.
Yeah.
We were very involved in creating it. There is a firewall definitely between the two organizations.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's got the name Patachou on it. So it's not just for greenwashing. It's because it also is aligned with the values of my company, Won't Stop Hospitality.
I'd love to talk about what the work the foundation is doing and the plan for that in 2025 and beyond.
So the Patachou Foundation is a small grassroots organization with a very simple mission, and that is to basically feed kids in school better quality food and measure the outcome. And the outcomes of feeding children in schools better quality food are all positive. So we have a program called Patachou. That is our main program. The vast majority of school cafeterias within the IPS ecosystem do not have working cafeteria.
Like, what do you mean by working cafeteria?
They don't have cafeteria ladies. They don't have cooks. They have workers, but most of the food is made elsewhere, trucked in, reheated in a microwave if it's hot, kind of thrown to the kids in a brown bag, and served in plastic, wrapped in plastic. It is lowest common denominator.
It goes to this equation, right, of
Value.
most amount of food for least amount of dollars.
That's right. And when you do that, you get the least quality product. Everyone understands that. No one expects the schools to be serving lobster and truffle. That's not what we're doing at all. What we do is we go in, we retrofit these cafeterias, we bring back working kitchens. We train staff, and so the Patachou Foundation has a workforce component that I think is critical to our success and critical to the impact, because the impact is not just to the student, it's to the people in the community who are working at the schools and being trained properly, and also being trained and being hired for thriving wage jobs within the school. Okay, so that's like kind of a twofer. It's a very big deal. We measure our impact using IU Health and Riley Hospital. They measure our impact, and we measure impact in a variety of ways. School attendance, discipline, performance, so academic outcomes, and health-related issues. So what we know is that when children are fed traditional school food is the lowest common denominator quality food, we know that there are issues with attendance, there are issues with discipline, there are issues with academic performance, there are health outcome issues as well, diabetes and obesity. We know scientifically when you feed children healthy food, what happens is there is a reversal in those negative outcomes. And we can prove in the schools in which we operate that we have greater attendance, greater academic performance, fewer disciplinary issues. We also have greater community involvement, parental involvement with the school. We have a happier student body. I mean, these are really positive outcomes, and better health outcomes as well. The one that encourages me the most is the fact that we have children who, when they're fed properly in school, and fed not only properly in terms of what they're eating, but also the dignity in which they're being fed, how they're being fed. It's a big difference for a kid who's literally thrown a paper bag with a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and cellophane. That does not connote to the child that they are worth more. But when they have someone serving them something, kindly knowing their name, putting it on a plate, and having them sit down, boy, there is a difference in their perception of what they deserve. So what we see across the board is an improvement in the child's attitude and in their ability to perform at school. Bottom line is, food can be this remarkable vehicle for social improvement. And if we can get kids who are educated better, then what happens down the road? Kids are more productive as citizens in their communities. And that's what we want. And you cannot set a child up for failure. And our school food system that's currently in effect, unfortunately, has the impact of setting them up for failure.
I mean, I could talk for another hour just about this whole, the school food system, but also the nation's food system and all of the stuff that's coming out about chemicals and all these things and just obesity rates over the last 50 years and things like I think that it's very, very interesting. You are definitely a front runner in this, but I think that there are many people that are kind of opening their eyes to we shouldn't be serving this to kids and we shouldn't be eating it ourselves. My hope is that there's a bigger emphasis on the American food system. This has been my geeky thing that I've been researching and learning about over the past probably 3 to 5 months. I think it's super fascinating.
I'm going to send you some charts and information that we use internally when we talk to people who are interested in our work. There is a direct link in the 60s and in the early 70s. Schools moved away from cafeterias that were producing food. They moved away from the lunch lady, the people in line who serve kids lunch. And they moved to this heat and serve model. Because why? It saved money. The downside was never taken into consideration. When you save money, it's probably at a cost of lower quality, right? So that's what happened in these schools. At the same time that the public school system changed their model of how to feed children, we saw a spike in childhood obesity. We saw a spike in lower test scores. Now, you cannot tell me, and no scientist of credibility would say that these are isolated and unrelated. Within an extremely short period of time, we saw these changes in how students learn, how they act in school, and what their health is like.
And it was I just listened to a podcast episode that talked about this and this change. And they said, go look in the 50s at a picture of a sold out New York Yankees game. And he's look through the crowd and look at the body types and the kids and just the people, and then look at one in 2024 and the amount of overweight and obese people, and just like, and the changes seemingly from a food system. And you can just compare like what a stadium or what a mass group of people looked like in 1950 something and in 2024. And it's vastly different. And it's terrifying a little bit. I could go so far and deep in this, but I think that's an awesome foundation and an awesome mission to help pioneer here in Indianapolis. What schools are you currently operating in?
We're actually growing the program. One of my favorite schools is the Madonna school system, which is on the far east side of Indianapolis. I had to figure out we do a school off of Millersville. We're in.
Are they elementary schools?
Madonna is elementary and middle school. We're feeding, hundreds of thousands of meals a year through the school food model. We are doing it remarkably successfully. Not only are we seeing the impact that we talked about, but we also are educating and training workers, and I'm very proud of that too. Let me leave you with this thought. One of the reasons why I decided that the foundation was a necessary way for the company that I owned and operated to pay back the community, I realized, this kind of came over me. I lived in Indianapolis, the largest city in Indiana, the capital city, one of the wealthiest cities in the state of Indiana, centrally located in the state of Indiana, a historically agricultural state. I still believe in arguably the wealthiest and most amazing country in the world. I really believe that. How do you have a city, Indianapolis, smack dab in the middle of a successful state that has a huge agricultural background in the middle of the United States, the wealthiest and strongest nation on earth, yet 80% of the students who attend Indianapolis Public School live at or below poverty and face pervasive food insecurity. I love talking about gaps. You talk about a gap, that to me was a gap that I could not tolerate just sitting by and going, I understand it. I'm not going to do anything to help it. And that's when we started the Patachou Foundation.
That's powerful. That's powerful. And I think as it continues to grow, it's been around for a decade
10
now.
Years. And we are growing the program because there is an acceptance of what we're doing, mainly because we've got such strong data to provide. And donors also, we're a small organization, which means that we're not like hoarding money. We're using money to make a real impact. And we've seen a real change in how people write checks, right? People don't just want to write checks to make themselves feel good. They want to write checks that they know the money is being spent to make an impact. So thank you. I would love coming back on and talking specifically about the foundation, its growth, what we're going to do, our next steps.
We'll have a part 2 for sure.
I would love this. We are currently involved with IPS, and what we do now, it feels like a drop in the bucket, even though that drop is, has lots of ripple effects. But when you think that there is not a large city, there is not a county, even in Carmel, even in Hamilton County, which is considered a really wealthy county, even there are people who live with food insecurity. And I'm sorry, it should be like priority number 1. Let's get our people fed properly.
I think the key is properly. You can get them fed, but it's like if you're still feeding them junk, then the outcomes are junk.
You get what you pay for. If you're saying that this person, because they're poor, only deserves a meal that costs $1 a meal, that's not good. It's not even good enough. What you're saying, and you started this conversation by this idea of you get what you pay for. You get what you pay for when you buy a $2.99 meal. You're not getting a bargain. You just need to understand that. And we're not feeding our kids a bargain. We're feeding them poor quality food.
I think that's a mic drop on that. Holy smokes. How can people support the foundation and the work you're doing there?
Always. We're a very small organization, and we always need financial help. It's interesting that this podcast is being taped on the week of Giving Tuesday. So thank you. I hope that it gets pushed out. People, we always need treasure, but we also need talent, and we need people's time. There are opportunities to learn more online, of course, and they can also stop by our offices anytime and arrange for a visit with one of our representatives to one of our schools, one of our model schools, to see how we do it in real time. The how we do it in real time is life-changing for people.
I love it. When we're thinking about food concepts in central Indiana, where do you see the biggest opportunity for new restaurateurs?
I think the biggest opportunity is still small neighborhood. The restaurant industry is really being pressured by large groups that have bought concepts and are now coming into Indianapolis and doing kind of a second wave of the Olive Garden idea. And these restaurant groups that are coming in, they are extraordinarily well financed. They are very strategic. And what they're very strategic about is making things look unique and homegrown and, individually concepted. We need our restaurateurs to open up small, successful neighborhood restaurants to combat what's happening.
When you're not at one of your restaurants, what are your favorite restaurants to hang out around town?
We're kind of creatures of habit, and we live in the Meridian Kessler neighborhood, and we like to support those restaurants. We love eating at the bar at the Meridian. We also were good friends with Steve Oakley. We eat at his bar once a week or once every 2 weeks.
Steve Oakley.
At Oakley's Bistro. And he's been around for a long time. His background is quite remarkable. He worked for years for Charlie Trotter. And I recommend, Nate, you watch the Charlie Trotter documentary, because that's a name that probably means nothing to you, but Charlie Trotter was a true innovator in the food industry and brought notoriety to American food and created the food scene in Chicago like no one else did. Since his death, I think 10 years ago, he's been widely erased from food world. I mean, he wasn't erased because he got canceled, for something. The food world moves so quickly. He didn't just stage, he literally chefed under Chef Trotter, and he brings a lot of that talent to the city.
I love that. What are the trends you're seeing in the best restaurants in Indianapolis?
I'm seeing an overarching understanding that you have to start with hospitality. A lot of restaurants were more interested in what's on the plate than what was in the building and how people were being treated. I think there is a recognition that you have to get them both right. You have to get the plate right, but you also have to get the service right.
I love that. The next question is brought to you by our friends at Orr Fellowship. They're a great organization here in Indiana helping develop young business leaders across the state. Martha, what advice would you give to your 22-year-old self?
Jump in the deep end of the pool. Do not be afraid of failure. Failure is not something that should bring shame. Failure is something that brings you growth and evolution. And if you're not learning, you're not alive.
That's so great. Oh my gosh, I love that. I also found here that you have been 6-time James Beard Foundation semifinalist, which is like the Oscars for the restaurant world, right?
It is.
What did those awards mean to you and your organization?
Well, they mean a lot. They're validation for sure of a governing body that measures excellence in the food and hospitality industry. And it's more than a nod and a wink wink. They are true validation that what we're doing is noteworthy.
If you had to pick one dish from any of your restaurants, what would your one dish be?
It's a seasonal dish that is done at Petite Chou called coq au vin.
What is that?
And coq au vin, it's literally translates a French dish. It's a cuisine grand-mère. It's not a complex dish. It's a chicken in red wine that's braised in red wine and served with little potatoes and a little salad. And it is probably my most favorite dish of all time. And whenever I see it on a menu, I order it. And I had a bar-setting experience when I was 12 years old tasting coq au vin for the first time. and at a little country restaurant, strangely, in Indiana, in Mooresville, Indiana. See, you don't know about this because we need to talk about the restaurants that no longer exist.
Okay. In part two, we'll hit that.
Part two, there was a restaurant called Chez Jean in Mooresville, Indiana, in a little motel street on the highway. Back in the day when you drove by motor lodges, motor inns. And it just so happened the purveyors were a married couple. She was this woman from Mooresville who talked like she was a woman from Mooresville, had a beehive, kind of looked like a church lady, married to a French chef. And they had this delightful French restaurant called Chez Jean. Twice a year, my family would drive to Chez Jean and have our most celebratory meals, and they still set the bar. And the Chef Jean, made a coq au vin that it was the loveliest dish I'd ever had.
Mooresville.
No longer in existence, by the way. But
darn. Well, hey, but you're keeping that legacy alive. Okay, I have 2 pieces left for you.
Hurry.
First one, I just found out that there is a secret menu item at Patachou. Is this correct? The burger? Is that like a hidden menu type thing?
Well, it's on the menu, but we only serve it at the locations that have the ability, in other words, the equipment to cook it. And it is quite lovely.
A burger. I mean, that's not what I expect when I go, but I'm impressed.
We put it on the menu where, as I said, and as they build out new Patachous and include the equipment, can update the equipment so that we can make the burgers. We realized with Apocalypse Burger, who doesn't love a burger?
Everyone. And your final question, what is a hidden gem in Indiana?
Working man's friend.
Oh, what do you love about Working Man's Friend?
There is nothing I don't love. I love the fact that since I started going there when I was in law school, went to law school in Indianapolis, and it was like a Friday afternoon hang for law students and medical students back in the day. I absolutely adore the simplicity. I love the fact that they've been doing it this way since day one. Love the fact that it's family owned and operated. And I love the fact that women are the owners and operators.
What do you have to get when you go to Working Man's Friend?
A cheeseburger with a bag of Lay's potato chips.
There it is. You heard it here. Martha, thank you so much for the time today. This was awesome. We're going to have to bring you back on for a part 2 to talk about the foundation and check in and make sure that they're taking care of your company, right? As they grow it, and make sure our quality is still there.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Get In. If you like what you heard, make sure you leave us a review wherever you listen to podcasts. This show is made possible by our friends up at Sweetwater. Whether you're looking to start a podcast or take your content to the next level, click the link in the description to see all of my gear recommendations at sweetwater.com. If you want a behind the scenes look at everything we're doing across the state, make sure you follow me on Instagram and TikTok at Nate Spangle. Thank you so much for listening and being part of what makes the Hoosier State great. We'll see you next time here on Get In.